The bullet tore through Preston Calloway's shoulder on a Tuesday afternoon in October 1883, and he knew right then that his luck had finally run out. He stumbled into the small mining town of Skidoo, California, clutching the wound with one hand while his horse dragged behind him, too exhausted to protest. Blood seeped through his fingers, staining his already dusty shirt a deeper shade of crimson, and the world tilted sideways as he collapsed against the hitching post outside what looked like a general store. Through the haze of pain, he heard footsteps approaching, quick and purposeful, and then a woman's voice cutting through the fog in his mind. "Don't you dare die on my doorstep," she said, and he felt hands on his arms, surprisingly strong hands pulling him upright. "I just scrubbed these boards yesterday." Preston tried to focus on her face, but all he could make out was a blur of dark hair and determined eyes before everything went black. When he woke, he was lying on a narrow bed in a room he did not recognize. Afternoon light filtered through faded curtains, casting everything in shades of amber and gold. His shoulder throbbed with a deep, insistent pain that told him he was still very much alive, though the bandages wrapped tightly around his torso suggested it had been a close thing. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. "Stay down," that same voice commanded, and Preston turned his head to see the woman who had found him. She was younger than he expected, maybe 24 or 25, with brown hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes the color of strong coffee. She wore a simple gray dress with the sleeves rolled up, and there was a smudge of something that might have been flour on her cheek. "The bullet went clean through, but you lost a lot of blood. You moved too much, and you will tear open the stitches I spent an hour putting in." "Who are you?" Preston managed, his voice coming out rough and dry. "Sarah Mitchell," she said, wringing out a cloth in a basin of water. "I run the general store downstairs, and you are either the unluckiest man in California or the stupidest, riding into town shot up like that." "Probably both," Preston admitted. He watched as she approached the bed and pressed the cool cloth to his forehead. Her touch was gentle despite her sharp words, and he found himself studying her face more carefully. She had the kind of features that might not stop traffic, but grew more interesting the longer you looked. A determined chin, a mouth that suggested she smiled more often than she frowned, and those eyes that seemed to see right through whatever walls a man might try to build. "What is your name?" she asked. "Preston Calloway." Sarah's hand paused for just a moment. "The Preston Calloway? The one they say robbed the bank in Bodie last year?" Preston closed his eyes. Of course she would know. Everyone in this part of California knew about the body robbery, about how 5 men had walked out of that bank with $20,000 and disappeared into the Sierra Nevada. What they did not know was that Preston had been forced into that job by men who threatened to kill his younger brother if he refused, or that he had tried to return his share of the money only to have it thrown back in his face. "I did not have a choice," he said quietly. "Everyone has a choice," Sarah replied, but her voice was not as harsh as her words. She finished cooling his forehead and set the cloth aside. "The sheriff comes by every few days. If he recognizes you, I cannot protect you." "Then why are you helping me at all?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, there was something softer in her tone, something that suggested old wounds not quite healed. "Because someone helped me once when everyone else had given up. Because I know what it is like to be labeled something you are not sure you want to be. And because you have honest eyes, Preston Calloway, even if you have done dishonest things." Over the next 3 days, Preston learned that Sarah Mitchell was possibly the most stubborn woman in the entire state of California. She brought him meals that were simple but well made: stew with vegetables from her garden, bread she baked herself, strong coffee that helped clear his head. She changed his bandages twice a day, her hands efficient and sure, and she talked while she worked. She told him about Skidoo, a mining town that had sprung up 5 years earlier when someone found silver in the nearby hills. She told him about the harsh desert landscape that surrounded them, how the summer heat could kill a man in hours and the winter cold could do the same. She told him about her store, how she had bought it with money she saved, working in a San Francisco boarding house, how people thought she was crazy to come out here alone. Why did you? Preston asked on the third day. He was sitting up now, able to eat without assistance, though his shoulder still felt like someone had driven a hot poker through it. Sarah looked up from the inventory book she was updating. Why did I what? Come out here alone? A woman running a business in a mining town, that is not exactly common. Neither is a bank robber with a conscience, Sarah shot back, but there was a hint of a smile at the corner of her mouth. She set down her pencil and leaned back in her chair. I came because in San Francisco, everyone already knew my story. My father drank himself to death when I was 16. My mother took up with a man who liked to use his fists when he drank, which was often. I worked 3 jobs to save enough money to get out, and when I finally did, I wanted to go somewhere nobody knew me. Somewhere I could be just Sarah, not poor Sarah, whose father was the town drunk. Preston felt something shift in his chest. I know about wanting to outrun your past. Then you know it does not work, Sarah said. The past always catches up. The question is what you do when it does. Before Preston could respond, the door downstairs banged open and heavy footsteps echoed through the store. Sarah's face went pale, and she held a finger to her lips. The sheriff, she mouthed, and Preston felt his heart start to hammer against his ribs. Miss Mitchell? A deep voice called out. You here? Sarah stood quickly and moved to the door of the small room, positioning herself in the doorway so her body blocked the view of the bed. Up here, Sheriff Dobbs. Just organizing some inventory. The footsteps climbed the stairs, and Preston could see the shadow of a large man fall across the floor. Got word there was a stranger in town a few days back. Man matching the description of Preston Calloway. You seen anyone like that? Half the men who come through Skidoo look like wanted posters, Sarah said calmly. You know that. This one would have been injured. Shot, most likely. I have not seen anyone like that, Sarah lied, and Preston was struck by how steady her voice remained. But if I do, I will be sure to let you know. There was a long pause. Preston held his breath, willing himself to stay absolutely still, despite the urge to reach for the gun he knew was no longer at his hip. Finally, the sheriff grunted. You do that? Man like Calloway is dangerous. Would not want him taking advantage of a woman on her own. I can take care of myself, Sheriff, Sarah said with an edge to her voice. But I appreciate your concern. The footsteps retreated, and Preston did not breathe properly until he heard the door downstairs close. Sarah remained in the doorway for another minute, listening, then turned back to him with fire in her eyes. That was foolish, Preston said. You could have turned me in. I could have, Sarah agreed, but I did not, and now you owe me more than just your life. What do I owe you? The truth, all of it, starting with why you really robbed that bank. So Preston told her. He told her about growing up on a ranch outside Sacramento, about how his father died when he was 18 and left him responsible for his younger brother Daniel. He told her about the drought that killed their cattle, about the debts that piled up faster than he could pay them. He told her about the men who came one night, men with hard eyes and harder reputations, and how they said they knew Preston was good with a gun from his time working as a ranch hand. They needed a 5th man for a job, they said, and if Preston refused, Daniel would have an unfortunate accident. I thought I could do it once and be done, Preston said, staring at the ceiling. I thought I could take the money, pay off the debts, and Daniel would be safe. But after the robbery, those men kept coming back. They wanted me for another job, and another. I told them I was done, and they said if I did not cooperate, they would make sure the law knew exactly who was involved in Bodie. I would hang, and Daniel would be alone. So you ran, Sarah said softly. I ran. I took Daniel, and we headed south. Tried to disappear, but they found us in Lone Pine last week. There was a fight. Daniel got away, but I caught a bullet from my trouble. I was trying to get to Los Angeles, somewhere big enough to vanish in, when I ended up here. Sarah was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. These men who forced you into it, do they know you are in Skidoo? I do not think so. They probably think I bled out somewhere in the desert. Good. Then we have time to figure this out. Preston stared at her. We? You think I am just going to throw you back out there to get caught or killed? Sarah crossed her arms. I told you, Preston Calloway. I do not give up on lost causes. And you are about as lost as they come. Why would you do this? You do not know me. I know enough, Sarah said firmly. I know you could have shot your way out of that situation, and you did not. I know you protected your brother. I know you are not the kind of man who wanted to be an outlaw. That is enough for me. Preston felt something warm unfurl in his chest, something he had not felt in a long time. Hope, maybe, or gratitude, or something more complicated that he was not ready to name. You are either very kind or very foolish. My mother always said I was both, Sarah said with a small smile. Now get some rest. You are still healing, and we have a lot of work to do. Over the next week, Preston's strength returned slowly but steadily. Sarah insisted he stay upstairs where the sheriff would not see him, but she brought him books from her small collection and a deck of cards to pass the time. In the evenings, after the store closed, she would come upstairs and they would talk. Preston learned that Sarah loved to read, that she had taught herself to keep accounts and manage inventory, that she had a sharp mind for business and a sharper tongue when someone tried to cheat her. He learned that she woke every morning before dawn to bake bread, that she took in a stray cat who liked to sleep in the store window, that she sent money every month to a friend in San Francisco who had helped her escape her stepfather. Sarah learned that Preston could play the harmonica, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, that he was better educated than most cowboys because his mother had been a schoolteacher before she married. She learned that he was patient with healing, that he did not complain even when she knew the pain must be considerable, that he had gentle hands when he helped her fold the bandages she washed every day. By the end of the second week, Preston could stand without help and walk slowly around the small room. Sarah declared this progress enough to give him a proper bath, which meant heating water on the stove downstairs and hauling it up bucket by bucket. Preston protested that it was too much trouble, but Sarah waved him off. You smell like a man who has been in bed for 2 weeks, she said bluntly. If you are going to be staying in my home, the least you can do is not offend my nose. Preston felt his face heat. Your home? I thought this was just a storage room. It is where I sleep, Sarah said. The bed you are in is mine. I have been sleeping in a chair downstairs. Preston stared at her, horrified. Sarah, you should have said something. I would have taken the floor. With a hole in your shoulder? Do not be ridiculous. She set down the last bucket of water. Now strip down and get in that tub before the water gets cold. I will be downstairs if you need help. She left before Preston could argue further, and he lowered himself carefully into the tin tub. The hot water felt like heaven on his aching muscles, and he had to admit Sarah was right about the smell. He scrubbed himself as best he could with one functioning arm, washed his hair with the soap Sarah left, and tried not to think about the fact that he was naked in the bedroom of a woman he was growing far too fond of. When he finished, he dried off and pulled on the clean clothes Sarah had left folded on the chair, trousers and a shirt that must have belonged to someone else because they fit reasonably well. His own clothes had been so blood-stained, Sarah had burned them. He was attempting to button the shirt one-handed when Sarah knocked and entered without waiting for an answer. Let me help, she said. And before Preston could protest, she was standing in front of him, her fingers working the buttons with practiced ease. She smelled like cinnamon and flour, and Preston found himself holding very still, hyper-aware of how close she was. When she finished with the last button, she looked up and their eyes met. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Preston could see the pulse jumping in Sarah's throat, could see the way her breath had quickened slightly. He wanted to touch her face, to see if her skin was as soft as it looked, but he kept his hands at his sides. Thank you, he said quietly. Sarah stepped back quickly, Her cheeks flushed. "You are welcome. I will get your supper." She was gone before he could say anything else, and Preston sat down on the bed, his heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with his injury. That night, Sarah did not come back upstairs after bringing his meal. Preston ate alone and tried to read one of her books, but he kept thinking about the moment in the bedroom, about the way she had looked at him. He was a wanted man with no future and no prospects, and Sarah deserved so much better than anything he could offer. But that did not stop him from wanting things he had no right to want. The next morning, Sarah was back to her brisk, practical self, and Preston wondered if he had imagined the tension between them. But as the days passed, he noticed small things: the way her hand would linger on his shoulder when she checked his bandages, the way she smiled when she caught him playing the harmonica, the way she always seemed to position herself between him and the window when someone walked past on the street below. 3 weeks after Preston arrived in Skidoo, Sarah declared him well enough to start earning his keep. "You cannot just lie around forever," she said, "and I could use help with the inventory. Can you count?" "I can count," Preston said dryly. "I can also read and write in case you were wondering." "Good. Then you can help me organize the stockroom. It is a mess, and I have been putting it off for months." The stockroom turned out to be a narrow space behind the main store, crammed with boxes and barrels and sacks of flour and sugar. Preston and Sarah spent the entire afternoon sorting and labeling, working side by side in the cramped quarters. It was hard work, but Preston found he enjoyed it. There was something satisfying about bringing order to chaos, and Sarah's running commentary kept him entertained. "That box goes on the top shelf," she said, pointing. "And if you tell me you are too injured to lift it, I will do it myself out of spite." Preston lifted the box with his good arm, biting back a grunt of effort. "You are a very bossy woman, Sarah Mitchell." "Someone has to be, or nothing would get done." She made a note in her inventory book. "Besides, you like bossy women, I can tell." "What makes you say that?" "Because you have not complained once, and most men would have been whining after the first hour." Preston grinned. "Maybe I just have better manners than most men. Or maybe you know I am right." They worked until the light began to fade, and when they finally finished, Sarah looked around the organized stockroom with satisfaction. "Much better. Now I can actually find things when I need them." "Happy to help," Preston said. He leaned against the doorframe, suddenly aware of how tired he was. His shoulder ached, but it was a manageable pain, not the sharp agony of the first few days. Sarah noticed immediately. "You overdid it. Come on, back upstairs. I will make you some willow bark tea for the pain." "I am fine," Preston protested, but Sarah was already herding him toward the stairs. "You are stubborn is what you are, and if you tear those stitches after all my hard work, I will be very annoyed." Preston let her fuss over him, secretly enjoying the attention. Sarah made the tea and brought it upstairs along with supper, and they ate together in the small room that had become Preston's world. Outside, the desert night was settling in, bringing cooler temperatures and the distant howl of coyotes. "Tell me about Daniel," Sarah said suddenly. "Your brother, where is he now?" Preston set down his fork. "Safe, I hope. I told him to head to San Diego and wait for me there. I was supposed to meet him 2 weeks ago." "He must be worried." "He is always worried. I have been taking care of him since he was 8 years old. He does not really know how to do anything else." "You could write to him," Sarah suggested. "Let him know you are alive. I have a friend who runs the post office. She owes me a favor and would not ask questions." Preston considered this. "It might put you at risk. If anyone intercepts the letter, then we will be careful. Use a false name. Have him send the reply to a different town. There are ways, Preston." He looked at her across the small table, this woman who had taken him in and protected him and refused to give up on him even when common sense said she should. "Why are you doing all this? Really?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "I told you about my stepfather. What I did not tell you is that it got bad enough that I tried to leave twice before I finally succeeded. The first time, he found me and dragged me back. The second time, I made it as far as Oakland before I ran out of money. I was sleeping on the streets when a woman named Margaret found me. She ran a boarding house and she gave me a job and a place to stay and never asked for anything in return except that I work hard and treat people decently. When I finally saved enough to leave, she gave me an extra $100 and told me to go make something of myself. Preston felt his throat tighten. That was a good thing she did. It was everything, Sarah said simply. Margaret saw something in me worth saving when everyone else just saw a girl from a bad family. She gave me a chance when I was as lost as they come. So when I see someone else who is lost, someone who maybe made mistakes but is not a bad person, how can I not do the same? How can I not give them the chance someone gave me? You are a remarkable woman, Sarah Mitchell. She smiled, and it transformed her whole face. I am just someone who pays attention and who does not believe people are the worst thing they have ever done. That night, lying in the darkness, Preston made a decision. He would write to Daniel, let his brother know he was alive and safe. But more than that, he would find a way to clear his name, to be the kind of man Sarah Mitchell deserved to believe in. He did not know how yet, but he knew he had to try. The letter took 3 days to reach Daniel in San Diego, and another week before the reply came back. Sarah's friend at the post office, a middle-aged woman named Ruth who asked no questions, handed it over with a knowing look. Preston tore it open the moment he was back upstairs. Daniel's handwriting was rushed and uneven, but his relief was clear in every line. He was safe, working in a hotel kitchen, and desperately glad to hear Preston was alive. He also had news. The men who had forced them into the robbery, the ones who had threatened Daniel's life, were all dead. There had been a shootout with a rival gang in Bakersfield, and none of them had survived. Preston read the letter 3 times, hardly daring to believe it. If those men were dead, the immediate threat was gone. Daniel was safe. But that still left the matter of the bank robbery, the wanted posters, the fact that Preston Calloway was a fugitive from justice. He showed the letter to Sarah, and she read it carefully before looking up at him. This is good news about your brother, but you are right to worry about the rest. You cannot run forever, Preston. What do you suggest? Sarah thought for a moment. We go to the source. We talk to the bank in Bodie, explain what happened. You offer to return your share of the money, testify against the other men if needed. It might not clear you completely, but it is a start. Those men are dead. There is no one to testify against. Then you testify about what they did, how they forced you. You have your brother as a witness. That has to count for something. Preston wanted to believe her, but years of running had made him cautious. Banks do not usually care about the reasons. They just want their money and someone to punish. Maybe, but you will never know unless you try. Sarah reached across the table and took his hand, her fingers warm and strong around his. I know it is scary, Preston. I know you have been running so long it feels like the only option. But I also know you are tired of looking over your shoulder. Let me help you. Preston looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face. In the lamplight, she looked fierce and beautiful and utterly certain. If this goes wrong, you could be charged as an accomplice. Then we had better make sure it goes right. They spent the next 2 weeks planning. Preston wrote out a full confession, detailing exactly how he had been coerced into the robbery, naming the men involved, explaining about the threats to Daniel. Sarah helped him polish the language, making sure it was clear and compelling. They contacted a lawyer in Independence, a man Ruth recommended as honest and fair, and arranged to have him review the case. During those weeks, Preston and Sarah fell into a rhythm that felt almost domestic. He helped her in the store during the early mornings before customers arrived, learning the inventory and the prices and the art of dealing with minors who tried to haggle. She taught him to bake bread, laughing when his first attempt came out dense as a brick. They played cards in the evenings and talked about everything: books they had read, places they wanted to see, dreams they had half forgotten. One evening, as they sat playing poker by lamplight, Sarah laid down her cards and looked at him seriously. "Preston, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When this is all over, when you have cleared your name or done what you can to make things right, what will you do? Where will you go?" Preston had been asking himself the same question for days. A month ago, the answer would have been simple: disappear, start over somewhere new, keep moving. But now, looking at Sarah across the table, he found his answer had changed. "That depends," he said carefully. "On what?" "On whether a certain stubborn, bossy woman might want some company. Maybe a partner to help run her store. Someone who is reasonably good with numbers and does not mind hard work." Sarah's eyes widened. "Preston, I know I do not have much to offer," he continued quickly. "I am a wanted man. I have no money and my prospects are not exactly promising, but I am good with repairs, I can handle a gun if we ever have trouble, and I make a decent cup of coffee. And I—" He stopped, suddenly nervous. "I care about you, Sarah. More than I should, probably. More than is smart, given the situation. But there it is." Sarah was quiet for so long that Preston felt his heart start to sink. But then she smiled, that brilliant smile that lit up her whole face. "You forgot to mention that you are terrible at poker, and you cheat at cards." "I do not cheat," Preston protested. "I just pay attention." "Uh-huh." Sarah stood and walked around the table. Preston pushed back his chair, and she stepped into the space between his knees, her hands coming to rest on his shoulders. "For the record, Preston Calloway, you have a lot more to offer than you think. You are kind and honest when it matters, and you did not run even when you could have. You stayed and helped me organize my stockroom, even though you were in pain. You listen when I talk, and you make me laugh, and you see me as someone other than poor Sarah from San Francisco." Preston reached up slowly and cupped her face in his hands. "You are so much more than that. You are brave and smart and impossibly stubborn, and I have never met anyone like you." "Good," Sarah whispered, "because I have never met anyone like you either." When Preston kissed her, it felt like coming home after years of wandering. Sarah's lips were soft and warm, and she kissed him back with a fierce certainty that made his heart race. His good arm went around her waist, pulling her closer, and she made a small sound of pleasure that sent heat racing through his veins. They kissed until they were both breathless, until the lamp burned low and the cards lay forgotten on the table. When they finally broke apart, Sarah rested her forehead against his. "We are going to figure this out," she said softly. "We are going to clear your name, and then you are going to stay here and help me run this store, and we are going to build a life together. Do you understand?" "Yes, madam," Preston said with a grin. "Anything you say." "I mean it, Preston. I am not giving up on this." "I am not giving up on you." "I know." He kissed her again, gentle and sweet. "I'm starting to believe that might be a good thing." The lawyer's response came 2 days later. He had reviewed Preston's confession and Daniel's supporting statement, and he believed there was a case for leniency. The robbery had occurred in California, so the trial would be held in state court. The lawyer recommended Preston turn himself in voluntarily, which would look better than being captured, and that they arrange for character witnesses who could speak to Preston's conduct since the crime. Sarah immediately volunteered to testify on his behalf, as did Ruth from the post office and several other townspeople Preston had helped during his time in Skidoo. Even Sheriff Dobbs, once Sarah explained the full situation to him, agreed that Preston had shown no signs of being dangerous or violent. "I do not like lawbreakers," the sheriff said gruffly, "but I like men who threaten families even less. If you are willing to face the consequences and make restitution, that says something about your character." The trial was set for late November in Bridgeport, the seat of Mono County. Preston and Sarah made the journey together, traveling by stagecoach through the desert and up into the mountains. Daniel met them there, and the reunion between the two brothers was tearful and joyful. Daniel looked older than Preston remembered, more solid and sure of himself, and Preston realized with a pang that his little brother was growing up. "I thought you were dead," Daniel said, hugging Preston so hard it made his shoulder ache. "I thought I had lost you." "Takes more than a bullet to get rid of me," Preston said, his voice rough with emotion. "I am sorry I worried you." "Do not be sorry. Just do not leave me again." "I will do my best." The trial lasted 3 days. The prosecution argued that Preston had participated willingly in the robbery and should face the full penalty of the law. The defense presented Preston's confession, Daniel's testimony about the threats, and character witnesses who spoke to Preston's integrity and his efforts to make amends. Sarah took the stand and spoke with such conviction about Preston's character that even the prosecutor seemed moved. In the end, the judge ruled that while Preston was guilty of participating in the robbery, the extenuating circumstances warranted leniency. Preston was sentenced to 2 years in the state prison, but with the provision that if he maintained good behavior and made full restitution to the bank, the sentence could be reduced. He was also required to pay a fine and perform community service upon his release. It was not perfect, but it was far better than hanging or spending the rest of his life in prison. Preston accepted the sentence with gratitude and relief. Sarah was waiting when he came out of the courtroom. She threw her arms around him, not caring who saw, and Preston held her tight. "2 years," she said against his shoulder. "I can wait 2 years. Sarah, you do not have to." She pulled back and looked at him fiercely. "Yes, I do. I told you I do not give up on lost causes, and I especially do not give up on you. 2 years is nothing. I will wait, and I will write to you every week, and when you get out, you are coming back to Skidoo where you belong. Do you understand me?" Preston felt his eyes sting with tears he refused to shed in public. "I understand." "Good." She kissed him, brief but intense. "I love you, Preston Calloway, even if you are terrible at staying out of trouble." "I love you too," Preston said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "More than I thought I could love anyone." The 2 years Preston spent in prison were the longest of his life, but they were made bearable by Sarah's letters. She wrote to him every week without fail, filling pages with news from Skidoo, how the cat had caught a mouse, how she had expanded the store to include a small lending library, how the miners had struck a new vein of silver and business was booming. She wrote about the weather and the gossip and the books she was reading. She wrote that she missed him, that she was counting the days, that she was planning their future with the same determination she applied to everything else. Preston wrote back as often as he was allowed. He told her about the other prisoners, about the work he did in the prison carpentry shop, about the books he read from the small prison library. He told her that he thought about her every day, that her letters were the only thing that kept him sane, that he was becoming a better man because she believed he could be. He also worked. He took on every job offered, earned every privilege available for good behavior, and saved every penny of the small wages prisoners were paid. He wanted to return to Sarah with something more than empty hands and good intentions. Daniel visited when he could, usually every few months. He had saved enough money to rent a small apartment in San Diego and was working as an assistant cook in a respectable restaurant. He was proud and happy, no longer the frightened boy who had needed constant protection. Seeing his brother thriving made the time in prison easier to bear. 18 months into his sentence, Preston received word that the bank in Bodie had accepted full restitution from an anonymous donor. It took him 3 days to work out that Sarah had paid it, using money she must have saved for years. When he wrote to confront her about it, she wrote back unapologetically, "Consider it an investment in our future. You can pay me back by spending the rest of your life making me happy." True to the judge's word, Preston's sentence was reduced for good behavior and restitution. He was released in May 1885, 3 months early, on a warm spring morning that felt like a new beginning. Sarah was waiting at the prison gates. Preston saw her before she saw him, standing beside a hired wagon with her hair shining in the sunlight. She wore a blue dress he had never seen before, and she was scanning the crowd of released prisoners with an anxious expression. Then her eyes found him, and her whole face lit up. Preston! He dropped his small bag of belongings and caught her as she ran into his arms. She felt exactly as he remembered, strong and warm and real. He buried his face in her hair and breathed in the scent of cinnamon and sunshine. I am here, he said. I am really here. I know. Sarah pulled back just enough to look at his face, her hands cupping his cheeks. You are thinner. Did they not feed you properly? I am fine, Preston assured her. Better than fine now. She kissed him then, deep and thorough, and Preston kissed her back with 18 months of longing and love. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, Sarah took his hand. Come on, she said. We have a long ride back to Skidoo, and I have been planning what to say to you for months. I do not want to waste another minute. The ride back took 2 days, and they spent every hour talking. Sarah told him about the changes in town, about the new families who had arrived, about her plans to expand the store even further. Preston told her about his time in prison, about the things he had learned and the ways he had changed. They talked about the future, where they would live, how they would run the business together, what they wanted from life. I want children someday, Sarah said, as they made camp the first night. 2 or 3, maybe. I want them to grow up knowing they are loved and safe. I want that too, Preston said. He poked at the campfire, watching the sparks rise into the night sky. I want to give them the childhood I did not have. One where they do not have to worry or be afraid. They will have that, Sarah said firmly. We will make sure of it. When they finally reached Skidoo, the whole town turned out to welcome Preston home. Sheriff Dobbs shook his hand and told him he was glad to see an honest man returned. Ruth from the post office gave him a hug and slipped him a package of letters that had arrived while he was traveling. Even some of the miners, men Preston barely knew, came by to offer congratulations and wish him well. The store looked exactly as Preston remembered, except cleaner and better organized. Sarah had clearly been busy during his absence. She showed him the new lending library, the expanded inventory, the small apartment she had built above the store with a real bedroom and a sitting area. I thought we could live here, she said, suddenly shy. Together. If you want to, I mean. We would have to get married first, of course. People talk, and I have a reputation to maintain. But if you are not ready... Preston pulled her close and kissed her thoroughly. Sarah Mitchell, are you proposing to me? I suppose I am. She smiled up at him. What do you say, Preston Calloway? Will you marry a stubborn, bossy woman who never gives up on lost causes? In a heartbeat, Preston said. In fact, I cannot think of anything I would rather do. They were married 2 weeks later, in a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of town. Daniel came up from San Diego to stand as Preston's best man, and Ruth served as Sarah's witness. The whole town attended, cramming into the tiny church to see the woman who ran the general store marry the reformed outlaw she had saved. Preston wore a new suit Sarah had ordered from San Francisco, and Sarah wore a white dress she had sewn herself. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Preston kissed Sarah like she was the most precious thing in the world, because to him she was. The reception was held in the store, with food donated by seemingly everyone in Skidoo. There was music and dancing and toasts that went on until well after dark. Preston danced with his new wife, with Ruth, with the wives of the miners, feeling lighter and happier than he had in years. This was what freedom felt like, he realized. Not just being out of prison, but being free to build a life with the woman he loved. That night, alone in their new apartment, Sarah and Preston finally had the privacy they had been dreaming about for 2 years. They made love slowly and tenderly, learning each other's bodies with patience and care. Sarah was beautiful in the lamplight, her dark hair spread across the pillow, her eyes bright with love and desire. Preston touched her like she was made of something precious, and Sarah responded with a passion that matched his own. Afterward, lying tangled together in the narrow bed, Sarah traced patterns on Preston's chest. "I love you," she said softly. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "I love you too," Preston replied. He kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for believing I could be better. You were always good, Preston. You just needed someone to see it." Life in Skidoo settled into a comfortable rhythm. Preston and Sarah ran the store together, a true partnership in every sense. Preston handled the heavy lifting and the repairs, built new shelves, and fixed the leaky roof. Sarah managed the books and the ordering, her sharp mind ensuring they always had what customers needed. Together, they expanded the business, adding new products and services, building relationships with the miners and their families. Preston also started working part-time as a deputy for Sheriff Dobbs. The sheriff was getting older and needed help, and Preston's experience, both good and bad, made him valuable. He knew how criminals thought, knew how to spot trouble before it started. He was good at the work, and it gave him a sense of purpose beyond the store. A year after their marriage, Sarah told Preston she was pregnant. They were in the apartment getting ready for bed when she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There's a baby in there," she said, her eyes shining. "Our baby." Preston felt like his heart might burst from his chest. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. I have been feeling sick in the mornings, and I missed my monthly courses. I went to see the doctor in Independence last week when I said I was visiting Ruth's sister. He confirmed it." Preston pulled her into his arms, gentle and reverent. "We are going to have a baby." "We are going to have a baby," Sarah agreed. "Are you happy?" Happy does not even begin to cover it. Preston kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You have given me everything, Sarah. A home, a purpose, a future, and now this. I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I promise I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy." "You already are," Sarah said. "You always were." Their son was born in March 1886, during a spring storm that rattled the windows and drummed on the roof. Sarah's labor was long and difficult, and Preston paced the floor downstairs, while Ruth and the doctor attended to his wife. Every cry of pain from above made him want to storm up there, but Ruth had banned him from the room with a stern look and instructions to boil water and stay out of the way. When he finally heard the thin wail of a baby, Preston took the stairs 3 at a time. The doctor met him at the door with a tired smile. "You have a son, Mr. Calloway, and your wife is asking for you." Preston entered the room to find Sarah propped up against the pillows, exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket, and when she pulled back the cloth, Preston saw the smallest, most perfect face he had ever seen. "Meet your son," Sarah said softly. "Patrick Mitchell Calloway." Preston sat carefully on the edge of the bed and touched one finger to the baby's cheek. Patrick's eyes were closed, but he seemed to sense his father's presence, turning his head slightly. "He is perfect," Preston whispered. "You are amazing, Sarah. You are the strongest person I know." "He has your nose," Sarah said with a tired laugh. "Poor thing. There is nothing wrong with my nose." "If you say so." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "We did it, Preston. We made a family." "We did," Preston agreed. He wrapped his arm around his wife and looked at his son, feeling a fierce protectiveness surge through him. "I am going to give him everything we did not have. He is going to grow up knowing he is loved and safe and wanted. I promise you that." "I know you will," Sarah said. "We both will." The years that followed were the happiest of Preston's life. He watched Patrick grow from a tiny baby into a curious toddler who got into everything. He taught his son to walk, to say his first words, to be gentle with the store cat. He read him stories every night and taught him to recognize the letters of the alphabet using the goods in the store. Sarah bloomed in motherhood, managing to run the business and raise their son with the same fierce competence she applied to everything. She was patient and loving, but firm when needed, and Patrick adored her. When Patrick was 3, Sarah became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and their daughter Emma was born in October 1889, during the first cool snap of autumn. She came into the world screaming her displeasure at the temperature, and she never really stopped having opinions about everything. Emma looked like Sarah with the same dark hair and determined chin, and she wrapped her father around her tiny finger from day one. Preston loved watching his children grow. He taught Patrick to ride when the boy was 5, finding a gentle old mare who was patient with the child's clumsy attempts. He built Emma a dollhouse from scrap wood and watched her arrange and rearrange the tiny furniture for hours. He told them stories about growing up on the ranch, carefully editing out the harder parts, and he made sure they knew they were loved unconditionally. Sarah continued to run the store with Preston's help, and their business thrived. They saved money carefully, planning for the children's future, making sure Patrick and Emma would have opportunities they had not had. They talked about sending them to school in Sacramento or San Francisco when they were older, about giving them the education to be anything they wanted. On quiet evenings, after the children were asleep, Preston and Sarah would sit together on the porch behind the store, looking out at the desert landscape that had become home. They would talk about their day, about the customers and the gossip and the small dramas of town life. They would hold hands and watch the stars come out, grateful for everything they had built together. "Do you ever regret it?" Preston asked one night. "Taking me in that day? Your life would have been so much simpler if you had just let the sheriff know." Sarah turned to look at him, her expression serious. "Not for one single second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Preston Calloway. You and our children, this life we built. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Even the part where I nearly died on your doorstep, especially that part." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Because it brought you into my life. It gave me everything I did not even know I wanted." Preston kissed the top of her head. "You saved me, Sarah. In every way a person can be saved. I was lost and you found me. I was broken and you helped me heal. I was alone and you gave me a family." "We saved each other," Sarah corrected. "I was stuck, living in the past, afraid to really open my heart to anyone. You taught me that taking a risk on someone can be the best decision you ever make. You taught me that people can change, that they can be more than their worst moment." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the desert, the distant howl of coyotes, the chirp of crickets, the whisper of wind through the sage. Inside the store, their children slept peacefully, safe and loved. It was not the life Preston had imagined when he was younger, but it was so much better than anything he could have dreamed. Years continued to pass in Skidoo. Patrick grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's steady temperament and his mother's sharp mind. He helped in the store and talked about maybe studying law someday, about using his education to help people who had been treated unfairly by the system. Preston was enormously proud of him. Emma turned out to be as stubborn as her mother, with a fierce independence that sometimes drove her parents crazy, but more often made them laugh. She loved to read and announced at age 8 that she was going to be a teacher like her grandmother had been. She practiced by trying to teach the store cat to do tricks, with limited success. In 1895, when Patrick was 9 and Emma was 6, Daniel moved to Skidoo with his new wife, a kind woman named Grace he had met in San Diego. Daniel had become head chef at a restaurant and had saved enough to open his own place. He chose Skidoo because he wanted to be near his brother and because the growing mining town could support another eating establishment. Preston helped him find a location and fit out the kitchen, grateful to have his brother close by again. The two families became inseparable. Patrick and Emma gained cousins when Daniel and Grace had twins, a boy and a girl they named Marcus and Lily. The children grew up together, more like siblings than cousins, and the sight of them running around Skidoo in a pack made Preston's heart swell with happiness. Sheriff Dobbs retired in 1897, and the town council asked Preston to take over as sheriff. It was a full-time position, which meant he would have less time for the store, but Sarah encouraged him to accept. "You are good at keeping people safe," she said, "and I can manage the store. We will hire someone to help with the heavy work. This is important, Preston." So Preston became Sheriff Calloway, a development that amused him more than he could say. The former outlaw was now the chief law officer of Skidoo, California, responsible for keeping the peace and protecting the citizens. He took the job seriously, treating everyone fairly, and working hard to be the kind of lawman he wished he had encountered when he was younger. He was good at it too. His past gave him insight into why people made bad choices, and he tried to address the root causes rather than just punishing the symptoms. He found jobs for men who were stealing because they were desperate. He mediated disputes before they turned violent. He was firm but fair, and the town respected him for it. Sarah's store continued to thrive. She hired a young man named Thomas to help with the physical work, and she expanded the lending library until it took up a whole corner of the store. She started a reading group for the women of Skidoo, and she quietly helped families who were struggling by extending credit or finding reasons to give them discounts. She was beloved in the town, known for her generosity and her practical wisdom. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1895, Preston took Sarah on a trip to San Francisco. They left the children with Daniel and Grace and spent a week exploring the city where Sarah had once been so unhappy. So, Preston bought her dinner at the finest restaurant he could afford, and they walked along the waterfront holding hands like young sweethearts. Sarah showed him the boarding house where Margaret had taken her in, and they stopped to visit. Margaret was older now, but still sharp-eyed and welcoming. She embraced Sarah like a daughter and told Preston he was a lucky man. "I know," Preston said sincerely. "I remind myself every day." On the last night of their trip, as they stood on the hotel balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, Sarah turned to Preston with a soft smile. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For giving me a life I never imagined I could have. For being a wonderful husband and father. For proving that taking a chance on someone, even when it seems foolish, can lead to something beautiful." Preston pulled her close. "I am the one who should be thanking you. You saw something in me worth saving when I could not see it myself. You refused to give up on me even when I had given up on myself. Everything good in my life started the day I collapsed on your doorstep." "We were both lucky that day," Sarah said. "Lucky to find each other." They kissed as the sun set over the city, two people who had started as strangers, who had become partners, who had built a love that would last a lifetime. As the years continued to roll by, life in Skidoo remained good. The town grew and changed, but Preston and Sarah remained constants, pillars of the community. Patrick attended university in Sacramento, studying law as he had always wanted. Emma followed a few years later, pursuing her dream of becoming a teacher. Both children came home regularly, bringing stories of the wider world, but always emphasizing that Skidoo was where they belonged. Daniel's restaurant became famous in the region, drawing travelers who made the journey specifically to try his cooking. Daniel and Grace had another child, a son they named Andrew, and the family remained close to Preston and Sarah. In 1905, when Preston turned 45, the town threw a celebration in his honor. It was officially for his birthday, but everyone knew it was really about honoring the man who had come to Skidoo as a wounded outlaw and stayed to become one of its most respected citizens. There were speeches and toasts and a cake Sarah baked herself, and Preston felt overwhelmed by the affection of his neighbors. "You have come a long way," Sarah said that night as they got ready for bed. "From the man I found bleeding on my doorstep to this. You should be proud." "I am," Preston said, "but I could not have done it without you. You were the one who saw past what I had done to who I could be. You gave me a reason to try, to be better. Everything I am, everything I have accomplished, started with you refusing to give up on me." Sarah came to stand in front of him, her hands resting on his chest. They were both older now, with lines around their eyes and gray threading through their hair. But Preston thought she was more beautiful than ever. She had the beauty of a life well lived, of love given and received, of challenges met and overcome. I told you that first day, Sarah said. I do not give up on lost causes. And you were never really lost, Preston. You were just waiting for someone to show you the way home. You were that someone, Preston said. You are my home, Sarah. You always have been. They kissed, slow and sweet, the kiss of two people who knew each other completely and loved each other anyway. Outside, the desert night settled over Skidoo, peaceful and quiet. Inside, Preston and Sarah held each other close, grateful for every moment, every choice that had led them to this place. Patrick returned to Skidoo in 1907 with his law degree and immediately set up practice. He specialized in defending people who could not afford high-priced lawyers, people who reminded him of his father's story. He married a woman named Catherine he had met at university, and they built a house on the edge of town and started a family of their own. Emma became a teacher in Independence, where she met and married a schoolmaster named James. They had 2 daughters, and Emma brought them to visit Skidoo as often as she could. She told them stories about their grandfather, about how he had overcome his past to become a good man, and she made sure they understood that people deserved second chances. Preston served as sheriff of Skidoo until 1912, when he decided it was time to retire and let a younger man take over. He was 52 years old and starting to feel the aches and pains of a life hard lived. His shoulder, the one that had been shot all those years ago, bothered him when the weather changed. But he was healthy and happy, surrounded by family and friends, and he had no regrets. He spent his retirement helping Sarah in the store, though she had hired enough help that neither of them had to work very hard. They spent their days serving customers, talking to neighbors, playing with their grandchildren when they came to visit. They took long walks in the desert in the early morning when it was cool, remembering their younger days and making plans for the future. On their 25th wedding anniversary, in 1910, their children threw them a party that the whole town attended. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. Patrick gave a speech about his parents, about how they had shown him what true love looked like, what partnership and commitment really meant. Emma read a poem she had written about second chances and the courage to believe in people. There was not a dry eye in the house when she finished. That night, lying in bed with the sounds of the party still echoing in their ears, Sarah turned to Preston. 25 years, can you believe it? Some days, no, Preston admitted. Some days I still expect to wake up and find this was all a dream. That I am still running, still alone, still that man who thought he did not deserve anything good. You were always worthy of good things, Sarah said firmly. You just needed someone to show you. And I am so glad I was that someone. Me too, Preston said. He pulled her closer, breathing in the familiar scent of her. I love you, Sarah Calloway. More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow. I love you too, Sarah said. My lost cause, who turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. They fell asleep in each other's arms, the way they had for 25 years, the way they would for all the years to come. The years continued to pass gently in Skidoo. Preston and Sarah watched their grandchildren grow, attended school plays and graduations, spoiled the little ones with candy from the store. They celebrated holidays with Daniel and Grace, with Patrick and Catherine, with Emma and James. Their family expanded and grew, filled with love and laughter. In 1920, Skidoo's silver mines began to play out. Some families left, heading to new boom towns or back to the cities. But Preston and Sarah stayed. This was their home, the place where they had built their life together, and they could not imagine being anywhere else. The town shrank but did not disappear, and those who remained formed a tight-knit community that looked after each other. Preston turned 60 in 1920, and Sarah threw him a small party with just family. His hair was gray now, his face lined with the years, but his eyes were still bright and full of love when he looked at his wife. Sarah was 59, and she moved a little slower than she once had, but she was still the strong, determined woman Preston had fallen in love with all those years ago. 60 years old, Preston marveled. When I was young, I never thought I would live this long. I certainly never thought I would be this happy. You deserve every bit of happiness you have, Sarah said. She sat beside him on the porch behind the store, their favorite spot to watch the sunset. You worked for it, earned it. We earned it, Preston corrected, together. Sarah took his hand, lacing their fingers together. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from blue to purple to black, watching the stars emerge one by one. Inside, they could hear their grandchildren playing, the sound of their laughter bright and joyful. Do you remember that day? Preston asked. The day I stumbled into town? Every detail, Sarah said. You looked terrible, bleeding, barely conscious, about to fall over. I thought you were going to die right there on my clean boards. Preston laughed. You were more worried about the boards than about me. That is not true, Sarah protested, but she was smiling. I was worried about both, but I knew even then, even before I knew your name or your story, that I could not just let you die. There was something about you, some quality I could not name. I just knew you were worth saving. I am so glad you thought so, Preston said softly. Because you saved more than just my life that day, Sarah. You saved my soul. You gave me a reason to be better, to try harder, to believe I could be more than my worst choices. You gave me everything. And you gave me the same, Sarah said. She leaned her head on his shoulder. You taught me that taking risks on people is worth it, that believing in someone can change everything, that love is not about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone who is perfect for you, flaws and all. They sat together as the night deepened around them, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a love that had weathered every storm. Inside, their family continued to laugh and talk, the legacy of their love spreading out into the world through children and grandchildren who knew what it meant to be cherished. Preston kissed the top of Sarah's head, feeling a contentment so deep it seemed to settle into his bones. Thank you, he whispered, for never giving up on me, for seeing something worth saving when everyone else just saw a criminal, for loving me even when I did not know how to love myself. Always, Sarah promised. I will never give up on you, Preston Calloway. Not in this life or the next. And she never did. The years that followed were golden ones, filled with the quiet joys of a life well lived. Preston and Sarah celebrated their 30th anniversary, then their 35th. They watched their grandchildren marry and have children of their own, making them great-grandparents. They attended christenings and weddings, birthdays and holidays, always together, always side by side. The store remained a fixture in Skidoo, though Sarah finally hired a manager to run the day-to-day operations. She and Preston still came in most days, greeting customers who had become friends over the decades, sharing gossip and advice and the occasional piece of candy with the children who came in. Daniel's restaurant passed to his son Marcus, who ran it with the same passion his father had. Emma became the principal of the school in Independence, shaping young minds the way her grandmother had before her. Patrick's law practice thrived, and he became known throughout the state for his advocacy for the wrongly accused and the overlooked. In 1928, Preston and Sarah sat on their porch watching the sunset, as they had done thousands of times before. Preston was 68 years old, his body bearing the marks of age and hard work. Sarah was 67, her hair completely gray now, but her eyes still bright and sharp. They had been married for 43 years, and Preston loved her more than ever. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if things had gone differently? Sarah asked. If you had ridden past Skidoo that day, if I had turned you over to the sheriff? Sometimes, Preston admitted, but not often. I prefer to focus on what did happen, on the life we built, the family we made, on the fact that the best thing I ever did was collapse on your doorstep. Sarah laughed, the sound rich and warm. The best thing I ever did was take you in, was refuse to give up on you even when it would have been easier. You never gave up on anything in your life, Preston said with affection. It is one of the things I love most about you. Someone has to be stubborn in this relationship, Sarah teased. And since you are so agreeable, I am not agreeable, I am practical. You are agreeable, Sarah insisted. You let me have my way in everything. That is because you are always right, Preston said. I learned that lesson early on. They bantered like the old couple they were, comfortable in each other's company, secure in their love. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and Preston thought about all the sunsets he had watched with Sarah beside him. Thousands of them, each one a gift, each one a reminder of how far they had come. In 1930, on a clear spring morning, Preston woke to find Sarah still asleep beside him. She looked peaceful, her breathing deep and even, and Preston lay there just watching her. After 50 years together, he still found new things to love about her. The way her eyelashes rested on her cheeks, the small smile that sometimes played at the corner of her mouth, even in sleep, the way her hand reached for his even when she was not conscious. I love you, he whispered, not wanting to wake her but needing to say the words. Today and always. Sarah's eyes opened slowly, and she smiled when she saw him watching her. Good morning, she said, her voice rough with sleep. Have you been staring at me? Maybe, Preston admitted. You are worth staring at. You are a silly old man, Sarah said, but she was pleased. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the lines time had drawn there. But you are my silly old man. Always, Preston promised, for as long as I have breath in my body. They rose together and started their day, the comfortable routine they had developed over decades. Breakfast together, a walk if the weather was nice, time in the store, greeting customers and friends, lunch with family when possible, quiet afternoons reading or talking or simply being together, dinners that often included grandchildren dropping by, evenings on the porch watching the stars emerge. It was not a dramatic life, not filled with grand adventures or exciting events, but it was a good life, built on love and trust, and the simple joy of being with the person who mattered most. It was everything Preston had never known he wanted, everything he had not believed he deserved, and he was grateful for it every single day. In 1933, Preston turned 73 years old. His health was failing now, his body finally giving out after decades of hard use. He moved slowly, needed help with tasks that once came easily, spent more time resting than he liked, but his mind was still sharp, and his love for Sarah burned as brightly as ever. Sarah, at 72, was in better health, but could not imagine a life without Preston. They had been together for nearly 50 years, had built a life and a family and a legacy. The thought of losing him terrified her, but she pushed that fear aside and focused on making every day count. One evening in late summer, as they sat on their beloved porch watching the sunset, Preston took Sarah's hand. His grip was weaker than it once was, but his touch was still tender. Sarah, he said softly, I need you to know something. What is it? Sarah asked, though something in his tone made her heart clench. I know I do not have much time left, Preston said. My body is giving out, and we both know it, but I need you to know that I have no regrets. Not one. Every day I got to spend with you was a gift. Every moment we shared, every laugh, every tear, every quiet evening, just like this one. It was all worth it. You made my life worth living, Sarah. You took a broken, lost man and gave him a home and a purpose and a love beyond anything he could have imagined. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. Do not talk like that. You are going to be fine. We have more time. Maybe, Preston said gently. But if we do not, I want you to know. I want you to understand what you meant to me, what you still mean. You saved me, Sarah, in every way that matters. And I have loved you every single day since the moment you told me not to die on your doorstep. I loved you too, Sarah said through her tears. From that very first day, I think, even though I did not know it yet. There was something about you, Preston, something that called to me, and I am so glad I listened. I am so glad I never gave up on you. Never give up, Preston echoed. That is who you are, my stubborn, wonderful wife who refuses to give up on lost causes. You were never a lost cause, Sarah said fiercely. You were just lost. And I am so glad I found you. They held each other as the sun set, as the stars emerged, as the night settled around them. They sat together the way they had for 50 years, two people who had defied the odds to build something beautiful. Preston Calloway passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 months later, on a cold November night. Sarah was beside him, holding his hand, and his last words were, "I love you." Sarah held him long after he was gone, unable to let go of the man who had been her partner, her love, her whole world for half a century. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of California. People came from Independence and Lone Pine, from Bodie and Sacramento, to pay their respects to the man who had been an outlaw and became a hero. Patrick gave the eulogy, talking about his father's courage and integrity, about how he had overcome his past to become someone who made the world better. Emma read the poem she had written years ago about second chances, and there was not a dry eye in the church. They buried Preston on a hill overlooking Skidoo, the town he had called home for 50 years. Sarah stood at the graveside, supported by her children and grandchildren, and said her final goodbye to the man who had been everything to her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for every moment, for every day, for loving me and letting me love you, for being worth the risk I took that day I pulled you inside my store. You made my life an adventure, Preston Calloway, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Sarah lived another 5 years without Preston. She remained active in the community, still helping in the store when she felt up to it, still hosting family dinners and spoiling her great-grandchildren. But everyone could see that part of her had died with Preston, that she was just waiting until it was her turn to join him. She talked about him often, telling stories to anyone who would listen, stories about how they met, about their courtship, about raising their children, stories about quiet evenings and inside jokes and the 1,000 small moments that made up a life together. She wanted everyone to know what kind of man Preston had been, how much he had changed from that wounded outlaw who stumbled into her store. "He was the best man I ever knew," she would say. "Not perfect, but real, and he loved me with everything he had. I was lucky to have him, even if it was only for 50 years. Some people never find that kind of love at all." Sarah Mitchell Calloway died in her sleep on a spring morning in 1939 at the age of 78. Her children found her in the bed she had shared with Preston, a peaceful smile on her face. On the nightstand beside her was a letter she had written to be read after her death. In it, she wrote about her life, about the choices she had made, and the love she had found. She wrote about Preston, about how taking him in had been the best decision of her life, about how he had made her believe in second chances and the power of love to transform. She wrote about her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, about the legacy of love she hoped she was leaving behind. And at the end, she wrote, "To anyone reading this, remember that people are more than their worst moments, that everyone deserves a chance to be better, that sometimes the best thing you can do is refuse to give up on someone, even when everyone else has written them off. Preston taught me that love is not about finding someone perfect. It is about finding someone who is perfect for you, and then building a life together one day at a time. I never gave up on him, and he never gave up on me. And that made all the difference." They buried Sarah beside Preston on the hill overlooking Skidoo. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to say goodbye, to celebrate a love that had lasted 50 years and beyond. On the shared headstone, beneath their names and dates, was an inscription. She was the woman who never gave up on lost causes. He was the cowboy who was glad she never gave up on him. Together, they built a love that will last forever. And in Skidoo, California, their story became legend. The story of the outlaw who found redemption and the woman who believed in him when no one else would. The story of second chances and stubborn love and the power of refusing to give up. Parents told it to their children, who told it to their children, passing down the lesson that people can change, that love can heal, that sometimes the best thing you can do is take a chance on someone the world has written off. Patrick practiced law until he was 70, always remembering his father's story when he took on a new client. Emma taught school for 40 years, instilling in her students the belief that everyone deserves a second chance. Their children and grandchildren spread across California and beyond, carrying with them the values Preston and Sarah had modeled: compassion, determination, faith in human goodness. The store in Skidoo remained in the family for 3 generations, a testament to Sarah's business acumen and the foundation she built. It became a kind of shrine, with photographs of Preston and Sarah hanging on the walls, telling their story to anyone who asked. The current owner, Preston's great-great-granddaughter, loves to tell visitors about her ancestors, about how they met and fell in love and built a life together against all odds. My great-great-grandmother used to say that everyone has something worth saving, she tells people. You just have to be willing to look past the surface to see it. She saw it in my great-great-grandfather when he was at his lowest, and it changed both their lives. That is the legacy they left us. Not just a store or a name, but the understanding that love and faith in people can transform the world. And so the story lives on, the story of Preston and Sarah Calloway, the outlaw and the shopkeeper, the lost cause and the woman who refused to give up on him. Two people who found each other in a dusty mining town in the California desert and built a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. In the end, that is what mattered most. Not the mistakes Preston made or the hardships they faced, but the choice Sarah made to believe in him and the choice Preston made to become the man she believed he could be. Together, they proved that it is never too late to change, never too late to find love, never too late to build a life worth living. She was the woman who never gave up on lost causes. He was the cowboy who was glad she never gave up on him. And their love story, born in adversity and strengthened by determination, became a beacon of hope for everyone who heard it. A reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from taking a chance on someone when everyone else has walked away. That faith and love and stubborn determination can overcome any obstacle. That everyone, no matter their past, deserves someone who refuses to give up on them. And in a small town called Skidoo, California, their memory lived on, a testament to the transformative power of love and the beauty of second chances.